Snobism begins with equality. This certainly does not mean that Proust lived in a classless society. But the actual concrete differences between these classes have nothing to do with the abstract distinctions of snobism. In the eyes of sociologists, the Verdurins belong to the same class as the Grammonts. The snob bows before a noble title which has lost all real value. Before a social prestige so esoteric that it is really appreciated by only a few elderly ladies. The more arbitrary the imitation, the more contemptible it seems. The nearness of the mediator makes this imitation arbitrary, and that nearness leads us back to Dostoevsky's hero. All concrete difference has disappeared between the underground man and his old schoolmates. All are bureaucrats in that artificial and studied town of St. Petersburg. There is now complete equality, and the imitation is even more absurd than in Proust. Underground heroes should disgust us even more than Proust's snobs, but we do not feel this disgust. We condemn one and forgive the other on the same moral grounds. Our attempt at isolating a specific and evil essence in snobism has failed completely. We always discover Stendhalian vanity on the one hand and Dostoevskian madness on the other. In all the novelists, the pendulum oscillates between pride and shame. Only the length of the arc varies. Why do we frown upon the snob so much more than on other victims of imitative desire? If the novel provides no explanation, we must look to the reader. The areas of desire which seem to us praiseworthy or picturesque are always the most remote from our own world. It is rather the intermediate and bourgeois regions of desire which arouse our indignation. Perhaps this historical and social distribution is not fortuitous. Since it is once again a question of imitative desire, our investigations should be guided by the novelists themselves. Proust is no stranger to anything even remotely connected with snobism. He must certainly have something to say of the disapproval this vice provokes in us. In a remarkable episode in Swann's Way, we witness the discovery of Legrandin's snobism by Marcel's family. Legrandin flutters around the local nobility after Mass. Instead of his usual friendly greetings to Marcel's parents, he merely nods his head and turns sharply away. This incident is repeated on the following 2 Sundays. The parents need no further enlightenment. Legrandin is a snob. Only the grandmother is not convinced by the evidence. She remembers that Legrandin is the enemy of snobs. In fact, she thinks he is even a little too hard on them. How could Legrandin be guilty of the sin he criticizes so fiercely in others? But the parents are not taken in by this bad faith. In their eyes, it only makes him more of a scoundrel. It is the father who throughout the affair shows the greatest severity and the greatest perspicacity. There is just one scene, but 3 spectators and 3 different interpretations. There are 3 ways of looking at the event, but they are not autonomous and thus of equal standing as the subjectivists would have it. They can be classified and given a hierarchy from 2 different points of view. The first is the comprehension of the scene. As one goes from grandmother to mother and from mother to father, Legrandin's snobism is more and more clearly understood. The different degrees of understanding form a sort of ladder on which the 3 characters are spaced. Behind this first ladder, we see another, more faintly sketched, representing moral purity. The grandmother is at the top of this ladder since she is completely innocent of snobism. The mother stands a little lower. She is no longer completely untarnished. Although she is always afraid of hurting people, and although she is especially fond of Swann, yet she still refuses to receive his wife, that former cocotte. The father stands still lower on the ladder. In his own way, he is the biggest snob of the family. He experiences the joys and pangs of vanity from the capricious attention and flattery of his colleague Narpois, the elderly diplomat. Taboos flourish in all milieux, not just in the Faubourg Saint-Germain, and excommunication is felt everywhere. The professions are particularly susceptible to the development of what Proust calls snobism. We merely have to reverse the ladder of comprehension to obtain the ladder of moral purity. The degree of our own indignation at the snob, therefore, is the measure of our own snobism. And Legrandin is no exception to this rule. He holds the lowest position on the ladder of purity and therefore the highest on that of comprehension. Legrandin is painfully aware of the slightest manifestations of snobism. The hatred inspired in him by the sin against the spirit is not feigned. The doors of the salons where he wishes to be received are closed to him by the snobs. One must be a snob oneself in order to suffer from the snobism of others. It is no unfortunate coincidence that the desiring subject chooses to be indignant at the evil by which he himself is consumed. There is a necessary link between indignation and culpability, and this indignation is fed by the most penetrating insight. Only a snob can really know another snob, since he copies the latter's desire, that is, the very essence of his being. There is no question here of looking for the usual difference between copy and original, for the very good reason that there is no original. The mediator of a snob is himself a snob, a first copy. There is a close and direct connection between comprehension and participation in metaphysical desire. Snobs understand each other at first glance and hate each other almost as quickly. For nothing is worse for the desiring subject than to see his own imitation brought into the open. As the distance between mediator and subject decreases, the difference diminishes, the comprehension becomes more acute, and the hatred more intense. It is always his own desire that the subject condemns in the other without knowing it. Hatred is individualistic. It nourishes fiercely the illusion of an absolute difference between the self and that other from which nothing separates it. Indignant comprehension is therefore an imperfect comprehension. Not non-existent, as some moralists claim, but imperfect, for the subject does not recognize in the other the void gnawing at himself. He makes of him a monstrous divinity. The subject's indignant knowledge of the other returns in a circle to strike him when he is least expecting it. This psychological circle is inscribed in the triangle of desire. Most of our ethical judgments are rooted in hatred of a mediator, a rival whom we copy. While the mediator is still remote, the circle is vast. It is very easy to confuse the trajectory of ethical judgment with a straight line, and the desiring subject always makes this confusion. The space of desire is Euclidean. We always think we move in a straight line toward the object of our desires and hates. Novelistic space is Einsteinian. The novelist shows us that the straight line is in reality a circle which inevitably turns us back on ourselves.